The Farm Bureau guest line. Check out favorites.com and go with the home team, Mississippi Farm Bureau. Kendall, let's start with the biggest news of the day here in the Magnolia State. Scott Berry announcing his retirement at the end of the season. It feels like the easy transition is to Christian Ostrander. I know that's not official yet, but before we talk about who's next, I mean, you talk about an ambassador for the game, a great coach, the winningest in Southern Miss history, remarkable consistency, and just an all-around good guy in Scott Berry.
Well, there's no doubt. I mean, Scott is salt of the earth. I mean, he's one of the best guys you'll meet in this sport. And I think when you look at what he's done at Southern Miss over the last few years, you are right. I think you used the right word, remarkable. You know, just kind of crunching numbers. I mean, if you look at what they've done over the last 6 years, 6 straight postseason appearances, 6 straight seasons, winning 40 games or more of those seasons. 2 of them include 47 wins or more. That's incredibly impressive in modern college baseball. And so I'm not very surprised that, he's retiring. I think anybody who's talked to Scott over the last couple of years probably saw the writing on the wall that this is going to come down in the next year or two. What a legacy he leaves behind. I mean, Corky Palmer was a legend in his own right. And Scott not only kind of took the torch, but I would argue that Scott was even more consistent at a kind of a higher level, and especially the last 6 years of Southern Miss.
And Kendall, I think it's important to point out, and I want to be careful to say that this is not a knock at all. Southern Miss has really good facilities. They have an incredible fan base. I mean, we're talking, top 15, top 10 in attendance on a year-in, year-out basis. But they don't have the same level of resources that so many of the schools around them in the SEC footprint have, and yet that consistency and that winning legacy has been steady, and it hasn't mattered what league they've been in.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing when you look at Southern Miss is they've kind of instilled a culture. You look at the Lynch brothers, you look at Gabe Montenegro, the Montenegro brothers, and they've just built this niche to where it almost kind of reminds me of, and Southern Miss fans will get mad that I'm invoking this team on them. But it kind of reminds me of that stretch run that, Louisiana Lafayette went on where they were like a top 8 national seed. They had won like 45 to 50 games, like 3 out of 4 years. It almost kind of reminds me of that run where Southern Miss has kind of created this culture in this program to where, they can't get a guy like Slade Wilkes to go to Southern Miss over some of the bigger schools in the SEC. They may not get a lot of those guys, but they have enough tradition, they have enough fan support, they have good enough facilities to where they can beat some of those teams out. And by the way, the other kids that are going to Southern Miss, a lot of those kids have a chip on their shoulder. And guess what? It's not like they're, incredibly less talented than some of those other kids. So I just think it all boils down to culture. I mean, they've clearly created a winning culture. It's a culture where the fan base, I feel like, demands that they win, and not in a negative way. I think it helps them create, that expectation within the program. So it's been really cool to see, and frankly, like this is what makes for me college baseball special. That you can have Southern Miss be a consistent, top 25 team in college baseball. You can have Coastal Carolina be a consistent top 25 team in baseball, win a national championship. That's what's special about the sport, and Southern Miss is a big part of it.
You mentioned Lafayette just a second ago. That's who the Golden Eagles will play this weekend. Yeah. They got the sweep of ULM, which they just had to do last week from an RPI standpoint. They've got a better ball club coming in. It's a Louisiana team that's been playing well. They got a sweep last weekend. And so the natural question is something that we talked about with you last week, the possibility of hosting. Have they got to get all 3 this weekend and then make a deep run? Is it just win the series this weekend? What do you think Southern Miss has got to do to be one of those 16 teams that's playing at home in 3 weeks?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think right now, so the RPI sitting at 27. They've actually got pretty good metrics across the board. They swept Dallas Baptist. I think if Southern Miss can win that series and win a few games in the conference tournament, and let's just say 2 or 3, and their RPI is inside the top 25, because really you want your RPI to be inside the top 25 to have a shot. I think if they can do that, I think they're probably hosting. So, I mean, Southern Miss is one of very few teams right now that I feel like they do control their own destiny. Like if they take care of their business, let's say they win this series, they win 3 or 4 games in the conference tournament, even if they fall just short, I think if they do those 2 things, they're hosting. So
all right.
The pathway is there.
Got to take care of business, though. Got to go win a bunch of ball games over the next 2 weeks if they want to get that done. Mississippi State went to Baton Rouge last weekend, and they won the series. They threw off in the first game and just kind of took their medicine, and that's what's happened 2 weeks in a row. But then Cade Smith was good. They come from behind. They win the slugfest on Sunday, and they get the series win. To me, the larger story, and I know I'm sitting here in Mississippi, is not Mississippi State winning that series. That's great, and you feel good for Chris Lemonis, and you feel good for the Mississippi State fans in a year where a lot of things haven't gone their way. That's good. To me, the bigger story is, man, I'm not sure this LSU team is built to win a national championship, despite their ability to mash it, despite what Skeens brings in game one. I don't know if they can win it all with their bullpen in the shape it's in.
No, you're right. I mean, I think of LSU as one of the most vulnerable teams when it comes to the regional round because, if I'm Jay Johnson, I'm not sure I trust anybody at this point to pitch that first game and just assure that I'm going to win the game. Because, for all you know, you get matched up with some team that's throwing some little thumbing lefty up there that you don't see his style very often. Let's say he only gives up 4 or 5 runs against your offense. Well, has anybody outside of Paul Skeens and LSU's pitching staff made you think that they can't give up more than 4 or 5 runs? So, I think it almost forces you to throw Skeens in the first game. And I'll tell you what,
I don't think you can do it, though.
I don't know, man. It's a tough call, but those fans are going to be a nervous wreck the rest of the weekend in a regional. And guess who else might be a nervous wreck? That entire team. So, I think they have a tougher time winning a regional than they do winning a super. I think in a super, I feel like LSU can probably just throw the kitchen sink at somebody and get enough outs. But in a regional, you can't just throw the kitchen sink every single game and go, okay, this is a great formula. Let's just throw everybody every game. You just can't do that.
Kentucky stays at number 1 in the RPI. They've got the number 2 strength of schedule. They salvaged a game last weekend against Tennessee. What have the Cats got to do to stay in and be a top 8?
Yeah, I think it kind of starts with just taking care of business this weekend. I think if they win that Florida series at home, I think they're in pretty good shape. Their conference record would be within range. The RPI obviously is very, very good. They would stay at 1 with that series win. So I think it kind of boils down to that and what they do in Hoover. I think if they win the Florida series, I think they're a top 8.
Okay.
I don't think there's very much doubt on that one. If they lose the Florida series, then they'll have some work to do in Hoover.
How concerned are you with Vanderbilt right now? Because they are going in the wrong direction, despite the fact that they're still sitting there at number 7 in the RPI.
I'm very concerned. I think if you look at those guys from a pitching standpoint, they're just, number 1, they're inconsistent, but number 2, they're banged up. 1 week, Carter Holton's banged up, and he's back the next week, and then he gets, ripped a little bit. The next week, Hunter Owen is out. The next week he's back, and then he gets hit hard. It's just a kind of a revolving door on the mound. And, when they get stuck, throwing Grayson Carter in the series finale against Florida, that rings kind of warning bells to me just because, he's talented. He throws hard, but it's not exactly the arm you want going against Florida in a Game 3. So, I have major concerns about him. That's one of the big reasons, along with South Carolina and with injuries, why we dropped them into the teams. I just think they're a much different team right now than they were, let's say, 4 weeks ago.
Kendall, it's hard to believe that we're saying this, but Alabama-Missouri is arguably the biggest series this weekend. Missouri's got to win at least win one to guarantee a spot in the SEC tournament. They've got to get one. With a sweep, Auburn could potentially play themselves into a host spot if they go and they win a couple of games in Hoover.
They could. Auburn is one of those teams that has a lot of helium right now. They're 14-13. They take care of business in that series this weekend, and they play well in Hoover. They're probably hosting. Guess who the committee chair is? Auburn Athletic Director John Cohen. Just put that in your back pocket. And then Alabama is the other really interesting team to me. I think if you look at Alabama, this is a club that I actually really liked them last week. I saw them up at A&M. They didn't play great on Friday, but they looked really good the rest of the weekend. And they're 1 game back of Auburn in the standings. They're actually ahead of Auburn in RPI. They're 11 in the RPI, and they had to head over Auburn. Yeah. So I think if Alabama takes care of business against Ole Miss this weekend, I think they actually go into Hoover in a little bit better position than Auburn, which is pretty incredible if they host a regional after everything they've been through. That would be pretty cool, actually.
Back with you on Sports Talk Mississippi. Kendall Rogers, good enough to hang with us for another segment as we talk college baseball on this Tuesday afternoon. So right now, Mississippi State outside looking in terms of the SEC tournament. Ole Miss has been mathematically eliminated. Mississippi State's got a chance, but they've got to have help. Who's going to be the final team in Hoover at the SEC tournament?
Well, I mean, right now, just pretty much down to two teams, right? I mean, you look at the standings. I'm just kind of pulling them up here.
Yeah, you got Missouri at 10-17, Georgia at 10-17, Mississippi State at 8-19.
I'll go with Georgia.
Okay.
I think Missouri gets swept this weekend. I think Georgia wins one against LSU.
You think Missouri loses all three to Auburn this weekend?
Yeah, man, Auburn's playing really well. They're playing really, really well.
Even as hot as Missouri's been and what Luke Mann's doing?
Yeah, I'll go with an Auburn sweep, which means Auburn will get swept.
Okay. What does Mississippi State do with A&M? Because that's an A&M team that has struggled. I saw you tweeted about that, I guess it was last weekend as well. But it's also an A&M team that's desperate, right? They badly need to win a couple of games in Starkville this weekend.
Yeah, I mean, A&M is one of those teams that, but you might as well just flip a coin to see which Aggie team shows up. I mean, I saw them 2 weeks ago against Florida. They shut Florida's offense down for the most part. 2 of the 3 games that weekend that they won that series over the Gators. They did the same. They took a series on the road from Kentucky. But then last week against Alabama, they get outscored 23-1 after winning the first game of the series. So the question is, okay, is the Alabama A&M team going to show up in Starkville, or is it going to be the Florida A&M team? And so that is really kind of the storyline of the series. And I think, the other thing with Mississippi State is, they're playing with no pressure. Their chances of making that to tournament are extremely slim. They go into the weekend playing with house money. And I think if you're A&M, that's a really difficult team to go against because they have nothing to lose. And they're coming off the series win over the number 2 team in the country. So, I like A&M in this series, but they're going to have to scratch and claw to win this thing. I think State's going to be pretty rejuvenated this weekend after what happened in Baton Rouge.
Kendall, Dave Van Horn has had so much success at Arkansas that I feel like this would be a big statement. But I'm wondering if it's accurate. Is this the best coaching job that Dave Van Horn has done in a regular season in his entire tenure at Arkansas?
I think it is. I had this discussion with Chris Childers and Rick Neuheisel on Sirius this morning, and the one thing that I was talking to Rick about, imagine losing your best receiver, losing your best running back, and losing your quarterback, which would be Jackson Wiggins or Friday guy.
Mm-hmm.
Could you have a number 2 team in the country in college football? Absolutely not, right? Well, baseball's a different sport. I know that. But Arkansas has lost its Friday guy. They've lost 2 key relievers. They lost Brady Tiger for half the year. He's finally back. And then you look at those guys offensively, they were without Tavian Josenberger and Jared Wagner for, 3 or 4 weeks? And they didn't lose a series during that time. That's incredible. And so, again, kind of like what we're talking about with Southern Miss and Scott Berry, I think the big thing with Arkansas is there are programs around the country that I feel like preach about culture and preach about culture and preach a little bit more about culture. Arkansas does not preach about culture. They just live that culture. They don't talk about anything, but every single season it is truly a next man up mentality. And even this year, when you look at their bullpen, Gage Wood was a guy that was up to 97 in the fall, was expected to be a very little used arm, a little raw. Well, all of a sudden, he turned into some stud shutdown reliever. And so that's just the way Arkansas rolls, man. They lose 3 or 4 guys, and there's just somebody there to step up. And it just says a lot about the culture. And to me, it just says a lot about the patience those kids have because, this portal age, it'd be easy for some of these guys like Gagewood to go, I'm out of the fall. They're not expecting me to be a frontline guy. You know what? I'm just going to go somewhere else. I threw 97. I can go play somewhere else now. Yeah. And their kids, for the most part, don't really do that, and that says a lot about them.
Yeah, and they've been kind of selective in the transfer portal, but they've gotten some big impact players over the last couple of years through that mode of recruiting as well. Off the field, Mississippi State got to fill a pitching coach role. There's been some question about the future of Chris Lemonis. I feel like that conversation has quieted a bit after what they did. Not that one weekend should make a difference one way or the other. What's your gut on this? Chris Lemonis back at Mississippi State, and if so, what route do you think they go for a pitching coach?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I would say he's back for another year. I think if they win that series this weekend, I think you're going, oh, okay. Like, they played well. They played well the last 2 weekends. Like, yeah, guess what, Chris? Like, this season was unacceptable, but maybe this gives you a little springboard going into next season. I think the biggest thing for me is had State just played, or like had State just thrown in the towel, so to speak, these last couple of weeks. I think you look at it a little differently. But this is a team that's not throwing in the towel. Like, they played their tails off over the weekend at LSU. They're probably going to play their tails off this weekend. And, again, I kind of go back to the dismissal of Scott Foxhall. Like, I don't think you're getting rid of your pitching coach and then 4 weeks later or 3 weeks later firing your head coach. Like, to me, that just sends very odd signals. I will say, though, again, I'm kind of reiterating this, but, like, the caveat for me is, Zach Selvin still has not made a splash hire, has not made a hire at all, unless there's a sport I'm not aware of. And there's an element of him wanting to kind of make his imprint on this school. And so, that's where I stand on that. I think on pitching coach, there's part of me that wonders if, this quick move by Southern Miss may have given us a glimpse into where they were looking for pitching coach. Like, I think Scott was done in the next 2 years regardless. But maybe they felt like they might lose a guy like Ostrander to Mississippi State, and maybe they just said, you know what, like, hey, Scott's wanting to retire anyways. Let's just go ahead and announce it. There's a part of me that might believe that after he was in the mix for the LSU job last year. Outside of that, I mean, they've got a lot of options. I think they could go across the country and find some pretty good options for pitching coach. In terms of actual for sure names, there's not a lot of info out there just yet on that.
Last thing for you, Kendall, you tweeted about the home run numbers this year. They are up about a quarter of a home run per game. It's remarkable how many long balls have been hit. There have been people that have talked about the reasons why, the balls being wound tighter, the strike zone a little bit tighter because umpires being graded on TrackMan. I've said I think the bats are hot this year. I don't know. What do you think the reason is?
I think the balls are clearly juiced. I mean, if you look around the country and look at some of the exit velocities and some of the homers I've seen this year are just absolutely ridiculous. Like, balls being hit off the end of the bat that just keep going. I saw one last week or 2 weekends ago, BT Ripel from Florida against A&M. I mean, he hit a ball on, like, literally the hands almost, and the ball just kept going and going. And that to me just tells me that I don't know whether it's the seams, but the ball just has a ton of drag on it. I do think strike zones play a part. I mean, if you look across the SEC this year, strike zones have been astronomically small.
Yep.
It's been crazy how small the strike zone's been in the SEC. I know it has not been the case in some other leagues, but the strike zones are very small in the SEC. So I think both of those things